Hello my friends and welcome back to Nocturnity. Tonight we will continue our October Terrorfest with a couple more terrifying tales centered around the evilest night of the year, All Hallows Eve. As always, this broadcast is brought to you by cardanapparel.com, and the link is in the description for your convenience. Now, let's forego any further hesitation and topple headlong into the realm of eternal night with these creepy chronicles. In my younger years, I used to work as a security guard for the company I now manage in Austin, Texas. Without a doubt, the scariest experience I ever had on the job back then, well, in my whole life really, took place on Halloween night 2006, when I was sent down to a small town a couple hours south of Austin called Yorktown to do a night watch at a local hospital, Yorktown Memorial. Until I showed up in the early evening, I had no idea the hospital in question had been abandoned since the mid-1980s. More to my surprise was the fact that it was a famous location for ghost enthusiasts. It was known as the most haunted place in the state, and one of the most haunted in America, and for good reason. Not only did it look like it was something out of a John Carpenter film, picture a 24,000 square foot Gothic stone brick facade holding an abundance of broken windows, complete with decades worth of grime, along with an overgrowth of leaves climbing the walls from thick trees which surround the sides and back of the property, the whole building itself shaped like a T, the top of the cross at the back. Not only did it look the part, but it also had a history of mental patients being maimed and killed during questionable experiments and cruel surgical procedures. Ghost sightings and terrifying experiences at the hospital were traded in Yorktown like baseball cards in any suburb in the country. It was finally shut down in 1986 due to these very issues, yet I'm sure it still stands there today. I didn't believe in anything supernatural at the time, so I went into the evening without a fear in the world. But that being said, it was a hot spot on Halloween for teens and college students to break into, so they hired outside security to assist in keeping an eye on it through the night every year, hence my participation. I met with a couple officers who explained my duties to me. Pretty straightforward stuff. Walk around the perimeter from sundown until sunup and make sure nobody got inside. Every hour I was supposed to go in a back door to walk through the facility's ground floor to check and listen for anyone who might have slipped in while I wasn't looking. If I did catch anyone inside, I was to radio the officers who gave me my orientation. That is, if the trespassers gave me any trouble and didn't leave peacefully of their own volition after I told them to. I mean, they weren't expecting Dillinger and the gang to show up and storm the place. If anyone, they were expecting kids to try to sneak a quick peek and then run off with a story to tell their friends. Nothing I couldn't handle on my own. Like I said, pretty straightforward stuff. Before the officers went out into the city to patrol that night, they brought me inside for a quick flash-lighted tour. The first thing I remember is that smell that hit me. It was quite offensive. I've never had a scent affect me in such a way. I'm not saying it smelled terrible, though it didn't smell good either. I mean, it gave off an air of hostility. It made you put your guard up. Every step we took echoed through the dark, dead recesses of the building, which showed all the signs of degradation from years of wear and no repair. Old furniture, weathered and rusted by time and torn to shit by bugs and rats, still all sat relatively exactly where it was the day the place was shut down. Part of the building was an old chapel that used to house nuns and priests. Deteriorated and chipped crosses hung crooked on some of the walls. The wooden pews were covered in a thick population of dust and cobwebs, while the remaining stained glass windows that hadn't succumbed to rocks being heaved through them from outside certainly lived up to their name. It really was like the set of a horror film. Yet it wasn't. It was a real place. I noticed the officers guiding me walked at a pace that showed just how uncomfortable they were being in there. For all the jokes about ghosts and demons they were telling me out front before we entered, they sure weren't saying any while they were inside. Every now and then one or the other would whip their head in some direction, as if they saw something coming at us, and when they'd see it was nothing, would try to play it off as if they were just stretching or cracking their neck or something. I couldn't help to notice that one of them had his hand ready to draw his weapon a few times during our venture. The place was eerie, I gave them that, but I thought they were being wimps, if I'm being honest. Not that I said anything to imply that, of course. Anyway, after we got back outside, They drove off in their squad car and I was left alone, just as the sun began to duck beneath the horizon. It wasn't a very busy part of town, but there were a few houses nearby, so when I'd be out front of the hospital, where the parking lot used to be, I'd see trick-or-treaters making their ways down the road. It was a completely different story along the sides of the place, though, where, as you stepped around the corner, you were engulfed in trees and weeds that hadn't been dealt with for probably 30 years. It was as if you were stepping into a different realm. Any city noise that was apparent out front disappeared in an instant the second you walked into the darkness of that foliage. I just kept my flashlight out and in front of me and kept one foot in front of the other. However, on my third or fourth lap around, about an hour and a half into my shift, while I was walking along the right side of the building, I noticed someone had got inside the hospital. He scared the shit out of me. I turned the flashlight towards the building, and as it hit the second floor window, it lit up his face, causing him to fall back into the darkness. I sprinted the best I could through the dark weeds and trees until I made it to the back door, and then grabbed the keychain from my belt to open it up. Stepping inside, that odor struck my nose with a vengeance. I slowly walked into the hospital hallway as the door slammed shut behind me, giving me a bit of a jump in the process. Being dark as night outside, meaning no beams finding their ways through any of the windows, the flashlight was literally the only source of sight for me, which made it difficult to gauge exactly where I'd need to go. I remembered passing a staircase during our walkthrough, so as I carefully navigated my way through the darkness towards it, I listened for movement on the second floor, but heard nothing but the echoes of my own boots against the floor. Up the stairs I went, admittedly a little spooked by this ominous building I was exploring in the dark, but more so determined to catch the intruder, or intruders in the act. When I got to the second floor, I was confronted with a long, empty hall. A chill went up my spine as I flashed the light here and there, and then suddenly I heard movement. I shot the light in that direction, and at the end of the hall I caught him just as he disappeared into a doorway to the left. "Stop right there!" I shouted as I ran after him. Hitting the end of the hall, I turned into that last door on the left and stopped in the doorway to shine the light around to see where I'd ended up. It was a smaller room full of dust and cobwebs. The skeleton of a cheap, little metal bed sat on the floor against the wall. Beside it was a broken-down dresser bereft of all its original paint. Against the other wall, which was made up mostly of exposed brick that used to be hidden behind gyprock that now sat as dust in small chunks on the floor, was a window over top of a radiator made almost completely out of rust. My heart was beating as I shone the light in all directions, expecting to see the trespassing runner hiding in the corner, but he was nowhere to be seen. In the last corner I lit up, there was a bathroom doorway, missing the door. "All right," I called out to it. "Don't you try anything stupid. You're not going to be in any trouble if you just show yourself and leave peacefully with me. Now come on out." There was no reaction. My pulse increased a little more as the beam of my flashlight showed nothing in that doorway but cobwebs and dust floating through the air. "Come on now," I continued. "Don't make this any harder on yourself. Just come out of there and I'll walk you back outside and you'll be free to go." The only response I got was more eerie silence. "Shit," I thought to myself as I grabbed the small can of mace on my belt. "Last chance," I threatened. "Don't make me come in there." Nothing. Not even the tiniest sound of adjustment. "Okay then, have it your way." I inched over the rubbish on the floor, closer and closer to the doorway, my flashlight in one hand and my mace in the other, breathing deep while preparing myself for someone to jump out of the bathroom at any moment. A thought then entered my head and forced confusion as I got right up to the doorway to notice the cobwebs were so thick and numerous. They covered the whole opening. How, I wondered, could anyone have gotten through them without disturbance? But there wasn't time to ponder this for more than that second, because I was now about to cross through them myself. I stomped my foot over the threshold and yelled, "Don't move!" with the mace out in front of me like a pistol. But other than a broken down, filthy toilet and sink, and spiderwebs as thick as ropes everywhere, the bathroom was devoid of anything. My pulse heightened all the more. I know I'd seen someone run in there. After moving the beam around the small space a couple more times to confirm nobody was hiding in there, I turned around, more puzzled than I'd ever been before, And with that turn, my puzzlement dissipated in an instant, and shock struck me like a lightning bolt. I let out an unintentional scream as my light hit the face of someone standing in the room right in front of me. A young man, standing still and staring me dead in the eyes, his own not bothered at all by the beam of light penetrating them. Out of pure fear-driven defensive instinct, I found myself spraying my mace at him. But as fast as he appeared, he disappeared. Not vanishing into thin air, but disappearing into the blackness of our surroundings as I dropped my flashlight to the ground with a thud. "Shit!" I yelled, still pressing the mace, expecting this young man to grab me through the darkness. But he didn't, and finally I let go of the button on the canister. The light had gone out when it hit the ground, so I was now in utter blackness, bending over and running my hands across the garbage on the floor to try to locate it. Just then, something ran across the top of my hand and let a high-pitched squeal out as it did. In hindsight, it must have been a rat. At that moment, it did well to cause me to scream at the top of my lungs again and fall backwards onto my ass, causing a dust cloud to surround and choke me in the process. I waved it away furiously in my state of panic, and then finally found my bearings and did my best to control my breathing to get a hold of myself. Soon enough, I was sitting there in the darkness, panting. It took a moment to come back to sanity enough to start moving my hands around the floor again in an attempt to find where my flashlight went. And then the strangest thing happened. I suddenly began to be able to see everything on the floor around me, as if a red bulb on a dimmer switch had been slowly activated. The flashlight became visible in an instant, and I grabbed it before I really realized what was happening. By the time my mind had clued into the glow, I looked up and was startled again to see a man with luminescent eyes of crimson watching me from the room's doorway. I shrieked for a third time and flipped my flashlight back on, but as soon as the beam shot out towards him, it revealed nothing but an empty doorway to the silent dead hall. "What the hell?" I found myself saying through my rapid breaths as I shone the light in all directions to see where the man had gone. But my attempts were hopeless. He'd disappeared completely. They both had. Or did I see them at all in the first place? People don't disappear, I told myself. You're letting the fear of this place get to you. "Get yourself together, Rory," I said out loud as I got back up to my feet and dusted myself off. A quick shine around the room confirmed it to be empty, so I made my way back out into the hall, and in no time at all, saw the original younger man I'd sworn I'd seen in the window earlier, the same one I'd sworn I'd chased into the room I'd just stepped out of. And now, right in front of my eyes, I watched him run out of one door at the far end of the hall and into another on the opposing side, which happened to be the same doorway to the staircase I'd entered this floor from in the first place. I was pretty damn jumpy at this point, so my instinct had turned to one of hesitation. Instead of giving chase right away, I threw down the empty bottle of mace I still had in my hand and picked up the walkie I'd been given from my belt. "Come in," I alerted. "This is Rory Sheffield at Yorktown Memorial requesting assistance." Nothing but static came back. I repeated myself and ended by asking for confirmation of being copied. No one said a word. Either those officers were ignoring me or the radio that they'd given me wasn't worth a damn. I then jumped at a crashing sound, followed by the taps of footsteps running down the staircase the boy had entered. "Ugh," I lamented. "God damn it." I put the radio back on my belt with frustration and headed down the hall, stopping at the door to the staircase, preparing myself, and then bursting around the corner. The staircase was empty, but I could now hear running on the ground floor, so I doubled myself down. Turning the corner at the bottom of the stairs, I just caught a glimpse of the boy running through another door about 20 paces to my right. I kept in pursuit, my mind racing between thoughts of what I'd just encountered upstairs and what may lie ahead down here. In no time, I was bursting through the same door he'd disappeared behind, and I found myself in the chapel. Let me tell you, it looked and felt 100 times more ominous than earlier. And even that estimation is being modest. I looked to my right, and then to my left, the beam of my flashlight decoding the darkness around me, my pulse reverberating through my chest, legs, and arms as I tried my best to remain calm. Once again, there was nobody visible, just the dusty, broken-down pews and years' worth of collected trash laying about. Another scan to the right once again revealed an empty oratory. But then, when I swept my beam to the left, I could have sworn that there, standing just inside the doorway at the front of the chapel, was a cold face staring back at me. It was so still and unassuming my beam traveled right by it before my brain registered what I'd seen, which, when it did, right away sent a shockwave up my spine and did well to deepen my pulse. What I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was a nun in full regalia. I swore it. but within the second it took for the flashlight to get back to where I'd seen her, she was gone. My paranoia was breaking the glass ceiling at this point, figuratively speaking. The nun's face was now just a terrifying apparition flashing through my psyche, her wrinkled face scowling at me as if I were the one trespassing in the very building I was guarding. But did I ever see her to begin with? Was fear making me see all these things? I shot the beam back and forth to see if she'd moved or if I'd seen something that I mistook for her. But there wasn't anything at all to confirm either option. Only pervasive darkness that did its best to keep my heart pumping at a rate it usually only reached after a hard workout. I shook my head to clear it of the tense feeling that was mounting inside of it, and then took a deep breath in an attempt to calm my nerves. And as I was doing so, a sneaking light of crimson began to glow around me. I whipped my head around, and there, to my utter horror, standing in the doorway I'd just come through, was that same phantom of a man with glowing red eyes that had spooked me upstairs. He was slowly creeping towards me. I let out a shout from the sight of him, once again dropping my flashlight to the floor, and toppled backwards in an attempt to escape him, but quickly became even more horrified to have felt the unmistakable sensation of having backed up into somebody. Turning around, I was now face to face with the disappearing nun, who was lit up by the red light now pervading the entire chapel. She was a vision of pure fright, wearing a blank expression on a face so withered it looked as if it could blow away as dust in the wind, and eyes made up of black shadows that hung above a gaping mouth. At this sight, my shout became a shriek of terror, and I found myself backing down a pew away from them both as they pursued me from two angles at the consistent speed of a snail. Hearing a noise towards the front of the chapel, I whipped my head in that direction to observe another horror. A man, or what once was a man, only now missing half of his head from what must have been a gunshot, pursuing me over the pews in front of mine. And make no mistake either, these things, whatever they were, didn't look like mythical, somewhat transparent ghosts. They appeared as real, tangible matter, the literal living dead, complete with the stench of corpse that was enough to rot your nostrils. In my panic, I somehow found the sense to turn around and run in the only direction no one was coming at me from, fully prepared to start sprinting. But even that was of no use. Instead, I froze on the spot like my feet had been soldered to the floor. There, at the end of the pew, showered in the blood-red glow of his companion's eyes, was the young man I'd been chasing the whole time, standing still and eyeing me like the devil eyes an angel caught in a bear trap, a slight grin on his face that hinted at nothing friendly. Every direction I looked showed one of these horrifying demons coming at me. I was surrounded, and they were closing in. As I turned my head to face each of them, one by one, stuck from indecisiveness, my mind crippled under the pressure, feeling as if it was about to blow like a steam whistle. I was convinced that was it. I was about to die of fright. The last thing I remember seeing was that young man shoot towards me like a rocket, right before everything went white and my consciousness left me behind. What must have been several hours later, I heard a faint call in the distance. My consciousness returned to my mind and I was able to open my eyes, as if granted a second chance at life. The world began to come into focus. Standing over me was a group of male police officers and a woman in a pantsuit. "He's awake," one of the officers reported to the others. "Can you hear me?" he then slowly and clearly asked me. I was so groggy I still didn't know what was happening, but I answered in the affirmative by nodding my head. He held out his hand. "Think you can try to stand up?" I reached out and was pulled up to my feet, then realizing I was in the chapel, which now had the sun shining in through the windows to indirectly light the place. I couldn't help but to shudder. A team of medics came in the door at that instant to check on me. I had a large bump on my head, probably from a fall to the floor, but no other apparent injuries. They asked what had happened. I told them that I thought I'd seen a young trespasser in the window while outside, and went inside to find him. And right as I was about to go into detail on what exactly happened to me, I stopped myself and said, "I guess I must have fallen in the darkness and bumped my head," and I left it at that. They all looked disappointed. I was told there was no need to make an official statement, but was instructed to report to a doctor in a couple days when I got back to Austin to follow up on the condition of my head. And then a strange thing happened. As we were all heading out the door to the bright outside, I jumped a little as I felt a hand softly graze my shoulder. It was the woman in the pantsuit. She signaled for me to stay back as all the policemen exited the doorway. so I obliged. She then introduced herself as the property caretaker and gave a slight grin. "It's a pity about your fall," she began, "but I do find one thing quite odd about the whole situation." "What's that?" I inquired. "Well, you told the police you thought you'd seen someone inside the building while you were outside, but there weren't any windows on the ground level in this particular part of the building that anyone would be visible from while you were out there." I was at a loss for words. "Moreover," she continued, "we found you on the ground within the pews. Now, if you thought you'd seen someone from outside, that is to say, you're still not absolutely sure if there was really anybody at all, then why would you have been in such a particular place as the pews? It seems to me that you ended up somewhere quite specific, as if you were pursuing someone on the run." I sputtered, "but I don't think you were pursuing anybody, were you?" "No, I think you were the one being pursued." She grinned again, a facial expression which communicated her message far better than words could have. "So you saw some of our residents then?" A chill went down my spine, and I nodded as I stepped over the threshold of the doorway. "You know," she continued thoughtfully, "all over the world people paid a lot of money to go through elaborately designed, faux haunted houses. But you got paid to experience the real thing and came out alive and well. Consider yourself a lucky man." With that, she shut the door in my face, but before it fully sealed, I swear on all that's holy, a host of hundreds of those phantoms, including all 4 I'd encountered, stood behind her in the chapel. An entire congregation of the living dead, menacingly standing there to see me off as the door came to a close. For as long as I live, I'll never forget it. My company wasn't called to work security for that hospital again, and if they ever do, the answer will be a resounding no. Like a lot of girls, Halloween used to be my favorite day of the year, even beating Christmas. October in general, with its golden leaves all over the ground and misty nights, was an excuse to watch scary movies, eat junk food, and dress in wild get-ups with outrageous makeup to match. And let's not forget about the parties. High school parties were always chaotic, but never boring, and always fun, minus the constant firecrackers. But things got even better when I got to be drinking age. Adult Halloween-themed parties in my early and mid-20s were unbeatable to me and my group of girlfriends. One year, we heard of a party happening on a big farm property in a city called Coquitlam, not far from where we lived. It was supposed to be a real rager, so we ditched our plans to go to the club and decided to spend Halloween there. That year I dressed up as a fallen angel and spent hours on my costume and makeup before heading out in a cab to the address I had written in my daybook. Since I was the only one with the day off out of all my group of friends, I would get there about an hour before any of them arrived. I was totally fine with that too. I was the only one of us not working weekends, so that tended to happen often on nights that all of us went out to events, which usually fell on Fridays or Saturdays. That year, Halloween was on a Friday. Anyways, when my taxi pulled up to the farm, the party was already in full swing. The main farmhouse had lights going on inside and music blaring loud enough for the International Space Station to hear it. Most of the partiers were jam-packed inside that house, but many were in the front and backyards too. I made my way in to find out where I could get a drink, weaving my way through some really great and really terrible costumes in the process. I kinda set up shop in the corner of the living room, and after a few drinks I was feeling pretty damn good. Then suddenly I felt a tap on my elbow. I turned to see a guy standing there behind me with a big grin on his face. He wasn't really wearing a costume, but he had some cheap plastic mask in his hand that he must have been taking on and off throughout the night. My initial reaction to him, just based on his appearance, was one of nervousness, to be honest. Something in the look in his eyes was just off-putting. He was a tall, skinny, balding, creepy-looking guy whose stare looked like that of a predator who thinks their threatening demeanor is a big turn-on or something. Like he thrived on the vibe that he was sending, even though he knew it was one of intimidation. He dropped some terrible line on me, some question about how naughty of an angel I could be with a creepy little laugh. I barely responded. He then asked if I were there alone because, as he said, he'd been watching me and hadn't seen me really talk to anyone yet. I tried to brush him off, doing my best to look elsewhere and show him that I wasn't interested the whole time, but of course, he wouldn't leave. After all, the wolf doesn't abandon the sheep because the sheep refuses eye contact. In that case, the wolf doubles its aggression. This wolf, who introduced himself as Willie, pulled a joint out of his front pocket and asked, "You bad enough to smoke one of these?" "Thanks, I'm good," I said, still looking around at the party as if to let him know anything would interest me more than talking to him any longer. "Come on," he pressed. "Let's go to the barn where it's quieter so we can talk, and we'll light this bad boy up and get to know each other." "I don't think so," I reasserted. Suddenly his hand was gripped around my upper arm, and he wasn't being gentle. "Come on," he insisted. My heart dropped. I knew he was about to pull me out of that room to the barn outside, and there was little that I could do about it. The music was so loud and everybody was so wrapped up in the moment, it would be likely that nobody would even hear me scream. But then, just at that moment, my friends Kim, Julia, and Catherine popped up from the other room yelling my name. The creep instantly let go of my arm and disappeared into the sea of people. My friends were super excited, yelling Happy Halloween in my face and holding shooters. One was extended out to me. "Bottoms up!" Catherine yelled before they all downed them. I didn't move. They now noticed how shaken up I was. I asked what was wrong, and I explained what had just happened. I couldn't see Willie anymore, but I told them that I'd had enough of that place and that I just wanted to go and that they should come with me. Luckily, I have great friends, and I didn't have to twist their arms. We ended up going downtown and doing a Halloween pub crawl that night, and had an awesome time. But the story doesn't end there. A few years later, that same Willie was posted all over the news. He'd been arrested for the murder, rape, and dismemberment of a whole slew of women. 6 bodies, or at least parts of bodies, of innocent women were found on his farmland, the very same farm in Coquitlam I'd been at on Halloween. He's now known as Canada's most prolific serial killer, a sicko who raped, tortured, and murdered unknown numbers of women, and then chopped them up and fed them to the pigs on his farm. It's even believed he ate some of the women himself, and suspected that some of the pork he sold from that farm was human meat. That very same barn he wanted to take me to was where the police found remnants and personal items of some of the women he'd done all that to, and I was mere seconds away from being pulled into that place with him. Just the two of us, where, according to him, we'd get to know each other. Thank God my friends showed up when they did, or I could have been pig feed. Well, my friends, that's the end of this one. I hope you've enjoyed your trip into the realm of Eternal Night during this, our 3rd installment of our October Terrorfest. One more on the way soon, so be on the lookout. In the meantime, help our young channel grow by giving this video a like, and, if you'd be so kind, a share. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, what are you waiting for? It's free, and the content will always be worth so much more than that. We'd love to have you as part of the fray. As always, this video has been brought to you by cardanapparel.com. Shopping with cardanapparel.com will not only have you looking fantastic, but you'll be financially ensuring the continuation of this channel in the process. The link is in the description. Now, there are plenty more stories on our channel page for you to listen to if you want to right now, and as mentioned before, the next installment of our October Terrorfest is only a matter of days away. Until then, my friends, stay safe.